3 a.m., my son knocked on the door. His new wife emptied the account and ran with her lover. I made coffee while he explained the rest. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. Bills he'd never seen charged to accounts he didn't know existed. His name on a car loan for a vehicle he'd never driven. Even their wedding rings were gone, sold, according to a receipt she'd left on the kitchen counter like a grocery list. Have you ever had someone you love show up broken at your door? Has something like this happened in your family? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to save the ones they love, this story will shake you to your core. The pounding came at 3 a.m. When I opened the door, my son stood barefoot, shaking, holding a bank receipt that showed zero balance. Have you ever had someone you love show up broken at your door? Has something like this happened in your family? Do you know someone who's been destroyed by financial betrayal? This isn't just about money. This is about trust, family, and what happens when someone you welcomed into your home decides to destroy everything you've worked for. But here's what she didn't know: mothers don't give up, and some of us know how to fight back with more than tears. Follow along as we expose a scheme that crossed state lines and nearly destroyed my son's future. The pounding came at 3 a.m. When I opened the door, my son stood barefoot, shaking, holding a bank receipt that showed zero balance. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking like it did when he was 12 and had broken something precious. "She's gone. Everything's gone." I pulled him inside, my heart already racing. The bank receipt trembled in his hands. Their joint savings account, the one they'd been building toward a house down payment, showed a balance of $0.17. 17 cents. That's what remained of 3 years of his overtime shifts at the plant. "Where is she?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would make this worse. "Tennessee. With Marcus from her office. She left this." He handed me a typed note, cold and businesslike. No apologies, no explanations. Just instructions about forwarding mail and a reminder that the lease was in his name only. I read it twice while he collapsed onto my couch. The note mentioned necessary financial adjustments and protecting mutual interests. Legal language. Calculated language. This wasn't a panicked escape, this was planned. "When did you last check the account?" I asked. "Yesterday morning. We had $43,000. His voice broke completely. "She said she was buying groceries. I gave her my card because hers was acting up at the store. $43,000. Gone in less than 24 hours. If this nightmare sounds familiar, don't face it alone. Subscribe so you catch the warning signs before they destroy everything." I made coffee while he explained the rest. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. Bills he'd never seen charged to accounts he didn't know existed. His name on a car loan for a vehicle he'd never driven. Even their wedding rings were gone, sold, according to a receipt she'd left on the kitchen counter like a grocery list. "Did she have access to your bank login?" I asked. He nodded, shame covering his face. "When I was deployed last year, I gave her everything. She handled all our bills, said she wanted to help. I trusted her, Mom. I trusted her completely." Trust. The word hung between us like smoke from a house fire. I'd watched her move through our family gatherings with practiced charm, always asking careful questions about finances, always interested in who owned what and where money was kept. I dismissed my unease as a mother's natural protection of her son. Now I wished I'd listened to that voice. But she made one mistake. She forgot about the folder I'd been quietly building for months. During his deployment, when she'd called asking about his banking passwords and insurance policies, something had felt wrong. So I'd started saving things. PDF statements he'd asked me to print. Screenshots of accounts when she claimed the website was down on his end. Call it mother's intuition or call it paranoia, either way, I had documentation going back 8 months. I didn't tell him about the folder that night. He was broken enough. But as he finally fell asleep on my couch, I opened my laptop and began reviewing files that would change everything. The timestamps told a story she never meant anyone to read. Comment: trust betrayed if you've seen someone get financially destroyed by love. The laptop screen glowed in my kitchen as I opened files she never knew existed. Every transfer. Every lie. All timestamped. At 4 a.m. With my son finally sleeping, I spread 8 months of financial records across my kitchen table. Bank statements, credit reports, insurance documents, everything I'd quietly saved during his deployment. What I found made my coffee go cold. The pattern started small. $25 transferred to emergency savings. $50 for investment opportunities. Always with explanations that sounded responsible, even protective. But the dates told a different story. The emergency savings transfers began 3 days after their wedding. Not 3 months. 3 days. Every statement showed her fingerprints. She'd added herself to his accounts methodically, one by one. First the checking account, then savings, then credit cards. Each addition came with a reason: easier bill paying, better credit building, protecting your deployment pay. By month 4, she was moving larger amounts. 500 here, 800 there. Always to accounts with names that sounded official. Future Holdings, Security Investment Trust, Premier Asset Management. Names that meant nothing but sounded like everything. I cross-referenced the dates with my son's deployment schedule. Every major transfer happened when he was overseas, when communication was limited, when he was trusting her to handle everything back home. But the most chilling discovery was in the pattern of her questions during family dinners. She'd casually asked about my late husband's life insurance. About the house's mortgage status. About my son's inheritance timeline. Questions wrapped in concern, delivered with the smile that had fooled us all. I found emails she'd sent using his account, messages to banks, insurance companies, credit unions. Messages he'd never seen, requesting information about policies and accounts. She'd been mapping our entire family's financial landscape. The Ohio credit union transfers started 3 weeks after their wedding. She'd been planning this from day one. At 5:30 a.m. I printed everything. Every statement, every email, every suspicious transfer. The stack grew to 47 pages of evidence that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was systematic, calculated theft. My hands shook as I organized the papers chronologically. Here was the proof of her access to his accounts. Here were the unauthorized transfers. Here were the credit applications in his name for cards he'd never requested. But the most damaging evidence was in the timing. She'd drained the account the same day she'd booked flights to Tennessee. Not the day before. The same day. She'd calculated it perfectly: take the money, board the plane, let him discover the devastation after she was already gone. I stacked the evidence in manila folders, labeled by month. $43,000 hadn't just disappeared. It had been systematically stolen over 8 months by someone who'd studied our family like a blueprint for destruction. When my son woke up, he'd learned that his wife hadn't just betrayed him. She'd studied him. Ever trusted your gut when everyone said you were paranoid? Share your story below. Harold squinted at the statements through his reading glasses. This isn't theft, he said quietly. This is warfare. Harold Morrison lived 3 houses down and had spent 38 years as a CPA before retiring to his garden and his coffee. When I knocked on his door at 8 a.m. carrying a stack of bank statements, he didn't ask questions. He just poured coffee and pointed to his kitchen table. Walk me through what you found, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I spread the statements chronologically, pointing out the patterns I'd identified. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. May I? He gestured toward the statements. For the next hour, Harold worked through the papers with the precision that had made him Louisville's most trusted accountant. He made marks, drew connections, and built what looked like a family tree of financial destruction. "Your daughter-in-law is sophisticated," he finally said. "Look at this pattern, she never took round numbers. Always amounts that would blend into legitimate expenses. Grocery stores, gas stations, utility payments. But see these secondary transfers?" He pointed to a series of small movements I'd missed. "She'd deposit money into legitimate accounts, then move it again within hours. Classic layering technique. She's washing the money through multiple accounts to obscure the trail." One expert opinion changed everything. Subscribe to learn how the right help can flip your worst situation. Harold pulled out a calculator and began adding figures. "The total theft is actually higher than your son realizes. She used his credit to open accounts, then moved those funds too. I'm seeing at least $58,000, not counting the interest and penalties he'll face." My stomach dropped. $58,000. My son made $32,000 a year at the plant. "But here's what's interesting," Harold continued, pointing to a series of transfers to the Ohio Credit Union. "See the account numbers? They follow a pattern. Same bank, sequential accounts. She's done this before." "What do you mean?" Harold tapped his pen against the table. "Professional financial predators develop systems. They don't just steal randomly, they perfect a method, then repeat it. These account numbers suggest she's used this particular credit union for multiple victims." The room went cold. Multiple victims? Look at the sophistication level. The layering techniques, the timing patterns, the choice of transfer amounts, this took experience to develop. Your son wasn't her first target. Harold gathered the statements into neat piles. "We need to contact this credit union directly. Not through normal channels, they'll protect their customer privacy. But if we approach them as potential fraud victims, they might be more cooperative." He reached for his phone. "I still have contacts in the banking industry. Let me make some calls." As Harold dialed numbers and spoke in the clipped, professional language of finance, I realized we weren't just fighting to recover my son's money. We were potentially stopping a predator who'd destroyed other families, other young men who'd trusted the wrong person with their hearts and their futures. Harold pointed to a pattern I'd missed. "She's done this before. These transfers have a signature. Drop signature scam if you think financial patterns can expose repeat offenders." The legal aid attorney looked up from the papers with raised eyebrows. "Your son's wife just handed us a roadmap to prosecution." Jennifer Walsh worked out of a cramped office in downtown Louisville, representing people who couldn't afford private attorneys. When Harold called his lawyer contacts, Jennifer's name came up immediately. She specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for taking on cases others wouldn't touch. "Interstate financial fraud," she said, tapping her pen against the evidence stack. "This crosses state lines, involves systematic theft, and shows clear intent to defraud. Your documentation is exceptional." My son sat quietly beside me, still processing the scope of what had happened. The $58,000 figure had hit him hard. 3 years of his life savings, plus debts he hadn't known existed. "What are our options?" I asked. Jennifer opened a legal pad and began outlining our path forward. "First, we file emergency motions to freeze any accounts we can identify. The Ohio Credit Union accounts, any Tennessee banks we can locate, even the accounts she used for the layering process." She pulled out a phone. "I'm calling the prosecutor's office. Financial crimes of this magnitude, especially with interstate elements, get taken seriously. We can potentially file criminal charges while pursuing civil recovery." As Jennifer made calls, I watched my son's face. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder. Determination, maybe. Or just the realization that this fight would define his next few years. "The freeze motions are approved," Jennifer announced after her third call. "Emergency orders went through. Any accounts we've identified are locked as of 30 minutes ago." For the first time since that 3 a.m. knock, my son smiled. "So she can't touch the money?" Not the money we've traced. But Jennifer, I said, Harold thinks she's done this before. Other victims, other families. Jennifer nodded grimly. That actually helps our case. Pattern crimes get prosecutorial attention. If we can establish a history of this behavior, it transforms from domestic dispute to criminal enterprise. She gathered the papers into folders. I need you both to document everything you remember about her behavior, her questions, her access to financial information. Timeline everything. The more detail we have, the stronger our case becomes. What about the debts in his name? I asked. Those get challenged as part of the fraud case. Credit cards, loans, anything opened without his legitimate consent, all of it can be disputed and potentially reversed. My son looked up. How long does this take? Cases like this? 6 to 18 months for full resolution. But the emergency freezes happen immediately. The freeze order went through. Her accounts locked at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Timestamp everything. What evidence are you collecting right now? The credit union in Ohio had never heard her real name. But they knew the account number by heart. Harold's banking contact called back at 9 a.m. with information that made my blood run cold. The Midwest Credit Union in Columbus had been asking questions about suspicious account activity for months. Not because they suspected fraud, because the account patterns were so unusual they'd flagged them for potential money laundering investigations. The account holder used the name Michelle Stevens, Harold's contact explained over speakerphone. But the social security number belongs to your son's wife. She's been using multiple identities across different institutions. Jennifer leaned forward. That's identity fraud on top of the financial crimes. Federal charges. I felt sick. Michelle Stevens. She'd created an entire fake identity, complete with documentation sophisticated enough to fool banking systems. This wasn't amateur hour, this was professional-level deception. There's more, Harold's contact continued. The account shows regular deposits from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana. Same pattern, same amounts, going back 18 months. She's been running this operation across multiple states. My son hadn't spoken since we'd arrived at Jennifer's office. Now he looked up with hollow eyes. 18 months? We've only been married 14 months. The timeline hit like a punch. She'd been setting up her theft infrastructure before they were even married. While he was planning their wedding, she was planning their financial destruction. She used fake names across state lines. Subscribe to spot identity red flags before they wreck someone you love. Jennifer pulled up banking regulations on her computer. Multi-state identity fraud triggers federal oversight. This case just moved from local courts to federal prosecution territory. What does that mean for recovering the money? I asked. Better resources, stronger penalties, and asset forfeiture laws that can recover funds even if she's spent them. Federal prosecutors don't play games with interstate financial crimes. Harold spread out more papers, records his contacts had quietly provided. Look at these deposit patterns. Every Friday, money moves from Kentucky to Ohio. Every Monday, it moves from Ohio to Tennessee. She's been washing money through this system for over a year. The papers showed a financial web that stretched across 3 states. Bank accounts, credit unions, even a small investment firm in Nashville. All connected, all moving money in carefully timed patterns designed to obscure the original sources. But here's the interesting part, Harold continued, pointing to a series of deposits that didn't match the others. These larger amounts, they don't follow her usual pattern. Different timing, different amounts, different origination points. Jennifer studied the records. Multiple victims. She's been stealing from other people simultaneously. The room went quiet. My son's wife hadn't just been planning to destroy him, she'd been destroying multiple families at the same time. Other young men, other families who trusted the wrong person. How many others? My son asked quietly. Harold traced the account patterns with his finger. Based on these deposit frequencies and amounts, I'd estimate at least 3 other primary victims. Maybe more. The coworker's real name appeared on 3 different accounts. None in his actual name. Flag this, fake names on financial accounts. Have you seen this warning sign? The life insurance policy had been amended 2 weeks before she left. Beneficiary, her mother, not my son. Jennifer's call came at 6 p.m., just as we were trying to process the multi-state fraud revelations. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. I need you both back in my office first thing tomorrow. We found something that changes everything. What kind of something? I asked. Life insurance manipulation. Your son's policy was modified without his knowledge, and the changes were made right before she disappeared. My knees went weak. I'd seen enough crime shows to know what life insurance changes before a spouse's disappearance usually meant. This wasn't just financial theft, this was potentially something much darker. The next morning, Jennifer spread insurance documents across her conference table. Your son's life insurance policy was increased from $50,000 to $500,000. The change was processed using an electronic signature system. I never signed anything, my son said, his face pale. The electronic signature was validated using your deployment-era banking passwords. The same passwords she used for the account access. Jennifer pointed to the digital signature confirmation. She had everything she needed to make herself a very wealthy widow. My hands shook as I read the policy changes. Beneficiary changed from spouse to mother-in-law. Death benefit increased by $450,000. Premium payments automatically drafted from the account she'd been systematically emptying. Why would she change the beneficiary to her mother instead of keeping it for herself? I asked. Jennifer's expression was grim. Distance from the crime. If something happened to your son, she could claim ignorance about the policy changes while her mother collected the money. Then they'd split it privately. The calculating coldness of it took my breath away. She hadn't just planned to destroy my son financially, she'd planned to profit from his potential death. The increased policy meant she'd positioned herself to gain $500,000 if he didn't survive the financial devastation she'd created. How close did she get to destroying him completely? I asked. Jennifer pulled out a financial summary she'd compiled. Debt load approaching $60,000 in his name. Credit destroyed. Savings depleted. If he'd fallen into despair over the financial ruin. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My son stared at the insurance papers. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was hoping he couldn't finish either. The good news is that insurance fraud is another federal crime. And the timeline, policy changes right before her disappearance, shows clear intent and premeditation. Jennifer gathered the insurance papers. This moves our case from simple theft to complex financial conspiracy with potential other implications. The room felt cold despite the August heat outside. My son's wife hadn't just been a thief. She'd been positioning herself to profit from his complete destruction, one way or another. The policy wasn't just changed. It was increased to $500,000. Life insurance changes before a spouse disappears. What does that tell you? Her mother answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. She's protecting herself from your son's debts, she said. I'd found the phone number through old wedding planning emails. Margaret Hughes, mother of the woman who destroyed my son's life. When I called, I expected denials, confusion, maybe even sympathy. Instead, I got calculated defensiveness. Mrs. Hughes, I'm calling about the money your daughter took from my son's accounts. We have documentation. Documentation of what? A wife managing family finances? Her voice was smooth, practiced. Young men today don't understand financial responsibility. The response was too quick, too prepared. She'd been expecting this call. $58,000 disappeared overnight, along with your daughter. That's not financial management, that's theft. My daughter is a smart woman who recognized a bad situation and got out before it got worse. Your son's gambling debts weren't her responsibility. Gambling debts? My son had never gambled in his life. His idea of risk-taking was buying lottery tickets for office pools. What gambling debts? The casino charges, the online betting accounts, the sportsbook payments. She showed me everything before she left. She was trying to protect both of them from his addictions. I felt my anger rising, but also recognition. This was their story, the narrative they'd prepared to explain her theft. Paint my son as a gambling addict, make her the victim of his reckless spending. Mrs. Hughes, we have bank records going back 8 months. Every transaction is documented. Your daughter systematically stole money using fake identities and multiple bank accounts. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Fake identities? Her voice lost some of its confidence. Michelle Stevens. Ring any bells? That's the name she used at the Ohio Credit Union. Another long pause. When she spoke again, the smooth confidence was gone. I don't know anything about Ohio or fake names. My daughter told me she was protecting herself from your son's financial problems. Your name is on the life insurance policy as beneficiary, Mrs. Hughes. A policy that was changed 2 weeks before she disappeared. A policy worth $500,000. This silence was different. Shocked. Frightened. When whole families coordinate fraud, victims never see it coming. Subscribe to recognize multi-person scams. She didn't tell me about any insurance policy. For the first time since the call began, Margaret Hughes sounded like what she probably was, another victim of her daughter's manipulations. Used as an unwitting accomplice, positioned to receive money she didn't know was stolen, implicated in crimes she might not have understood. Mrs. Hughes, your daughter has been stealing from multiple families across 3 states. She used your name on legal documents without your knowledge. You're as much a victim as my son. Multiple families? Her voice was barely a whisper. At least 3 other victims that we know of. Your daughter is a professional financial predator. The phone went quiet except for the sound of Margaret Hughes crying softly. I thought she was finally getting her life together, she whispered. She said she'd found someone stable, someone who could provide security. She laughed when I mentioned the frozen accounts. You think you're the first family we've dealt with? Right, family scam, if you think this runs deeper than one person. Harold's research turned up 2 previous husbands. Both filed bankruptcy. Both lost everything to investment mistakes. The call came while I was still processing Margaret Hughes' breakdown. Harold had spent the weekend digging through public records, cross-referencing names and addresses connected to my son's wife. You need to sit down for this, he said. I was already sitting, but I gripped the kitchen chair harder. Her real name is Rebecca Ann Sullivan. She's been married 3 times. Divorced twice, widowed once. Every husband faced financial ruin within 2 years of marriage. Rebecca Ann Sullivan. Not the name on their marriage certificate. Not the name she'd used for their joint accounts. Even her identity during their marriage had been a lie. The first husband, David Chen, married her in 2019 in Tennessee. By 2021, he'd filed for bankruptcy. Lost his house, his business, everything. Public records show investment fraud as the cause. Investment fraud? She convinced him to invest their savings in a company that didn't exist. Same pattern as with your son, systematic access to his finances, then complete drain with explanations about protecting their future. My stomach turned. David Chen was probably a young man like my son, trusting someone he loved with everything he'd worked for. The second husband was Marcus Rodriguez in Kentucky. Married 2021, divorced 2023. Also filed bankruptcy, citing spousal financial abuse. He's the one who'll testify. Serial financial predators exist. How do we protect the vulnerable men in our lives? Marcus Rodriguez? He's willing to help. More than willing. When I called him yesterday, he said he'd been waiting 2 years for someone else to come forward. He kept everything: documents, recordings, text messages. He wanted to warn other men but didn't know how to find them. Harold continued reading from his notes. The third husband was James Mitchell in Indiana. Married her in early 2023. He died in a car accident 6 months later, right after she'd increased his life insurance and changed the beneficiary. The room went cold. She was widowed right after increasing life insurance. $500,000 policy. Beneficiary changed to her mother 3 weeks before his death. Sound familiar? It sounded exactly like what she tried to do with my son. The same pattern, the same amounts, the same beneficiary change. James Mitchell had died before she'd needed to destroy him financially. Harold, was his death investigated? Officially ruled accidental. Single car crash on a rural road. But Marcus Rodriguez told me James had called him 2 days before his death, saying his wife was acting strange and he was worried about their finances. 2 days before his death. My son could have been next. There's more, Harold said quietly. I found marriage records in Ohio for a Rebecca Sullivan and a Marcus Patterson, dated 3 months ago. Right around when she started the systematic theft from your son's accounts. My blood went cold. She'd been married to someone else while married to my son. Bigamy on top of everything else. She's still operating, isn't she? With a new victim. A man who has no idea what's coming. Husband number 1 lived 3 counties over. He was willing to testify. Serial financial predators exist. How do we protect the vulnerable men in our lives? The banker's testimony was devastating. She knew exactly which accounts wouldn't be monitored immediately. Jennifer had assembled our evidence like a military operation. 3 days before the hearing, her conference room looked like a war room, timelines on whiteboards, evidence boxes labeled by state, witness statements organized chronologically. Rebecca Sullivan, and yes, that's her real name, operated what federal prosecutors are calling a marriage fraud ring, Jennifer explained. Multiple identities, multiple victims, multiple states. David Chen had driven down from Tennessee to testify. Marcus Rodriguez brought boxes of evidence from Kentucky. Even Margaret Hughes, Rebecca's own mother, had agreed to cooperate after learning the truth about her daughter's operations. The federal prosecutor assigned to this case specializes in organized financial crimes, Jennifer continued. This isn't being treated as domestic dispute anymore. It's racketeering. My son sat quietly through the preparation sessions, listening to other men describe their own destruction at his wife's hands. David's story was almost identical: gradual access to finances, systematic transfers, sudden disappearance with a coworker. Marcus had been suspicious enough to record conversations, capturing Rebecca planning her exit strategy while pretending to love him. The recordings are brutal, Jennifer said, setting up the audio equipment. She talks about her victims like business transactions. We listened to Rebecca's voice discussing my son with cold calculation. This one's got steady work and no family money to complicate things. Military background means he trusts authority figures. Should be clean and simple. My son's face went white. She studied me like a target. All of you, Jennifer replied. The federal investigation found she kept detailed files on potential victims. Income levels, family situations, psychological profiles. She was hunting systematically. David Chen leaned forward. She told me I was her soulmate. Made me believe we were planning our future together. Same here, Marcus added. Right up until the day she emptied everything and disappeared. Professional witnesses make fraud cases winnable. Subscribe to learn what evidence actually matters in court. The bank's fraud specialist would testify about the sophistication of Rebecca's money laundering techniques. The insurance investigator would explain how she'd manipulated policies across multiple victims. Even the Ohio Credit Union was sending representatives to detail her fake identity operations. This hearing isn't just about recovering your son's money, Jennifer told us. It's about stopping a predator who's destroyed multiple families and preventing her from finding new victims. The night before the hearing, Harold came by with final timeline documents. 47 victims identified across 6 states over 4 years, he said quietly. Your son was number 47. 47 families. 47 young men whose trust had been weaponized against them. The scope was staggering. But here's the important part, Harold continued. Because your son's case exposed the full pattern, federal investigators have been able to identify and warn current potential victims. She won't be hunting in secret anymore. The process server found her in Tennessee. She'd be required to appear whether she wanted to or not. Legal accountability is possible. Share, justice served, if you believe in fighting back. The co-worker's ex-wife called us directly. He's done this before too, she whispered. I have recordings. Linda Patterson's call came at 11 p.m., 2 days before the hearing. She'd found our contact information through court filings and called from a gas station parking lot in Tennessee. Marcus Patterson is my ex-husband. Rebecca Sullivan destroyed our marriage and our finances, just like she did to your son. We've been looking for Marcus Patterson, I said. The man Rebecca left with. She didn't just leave with him. She married him while still married to your son. I have the marriage certificate. And the divorce papers from our marriage that she forced through while we were still trying to work things out. Linda's story unfolded like a mirror image of our situation. Marcus had been a good husband, steady job, savings built up over years of careful work. Rebecca had moved in gradually, first as a friend helping with their troubled marriage, then as Marcus's affair partner, finally as his new wife. She convinced him that I was the problem. That I was hiding money, cheating, planning to divorce him and take everything. She had him sign papers giving her access to all our accounts for protection. How long did this take? 8 months. Same timeline as with your son. She works fast once she identifies a target. Linda's voice shook as she described watching her marriage dissolve while Rebecca systematically stole their savings. I tried to warn Marcus, but she'd poisoned him against me. He thought I was lying out of jealousy. You said you have recordings? Hours of them. Rebecca bragging about her system, planning moves across state lines, even talking about the insurance policies. She records everything herself, keeps it as insurance against her victims fighting back. This was bigger than we'd imagined. Rebecca didn't just steal and run, she kept detailed records of her crimes, probably planning to use them as leverage if anyone tried to prosecute her. Linda, would you be willing to testify at our hearing? I'll do more than testify. I'll bring everything. The recordings, the fake marriage documents, the bank records showing where our money went. She destroyed my family, but maybe we can stop her from destroying others. Linda agreed to drive to Louisville that night, bringing evidence boxes that would complete the picture of Rebecca's operations. She knew details about the Tennessee setup, the fake identities, even the other co-workers Rebecca had been grooming as potential allies in future schemes. One more thing, Linda said before hanging up. She's pregnant. Claims it's Marcus's baby, but the timing doesn't match. She's planning to use the pregnancy for sympathy at the hearing. The recordings included their plan to disappear to Florida. With a timeline. Document everything. What evidence are you preserving right now? She walked into court wearing a designer dress and confidence that cracked the moment she saw our evidence folders. Rebecca and Sullivan strutted through those courthouse doors like she owned the place. Hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, carrying a leather purse that probably cost more than my son made in a month. She had that look women get when they think they're untouchable. Then she saw our table. 17 evidence folders. 3 witnesses. Harold with his calculator and reading glasses. Jennifer with legal pads stacked 2 feet high. My son sitting straight-backed in his best suit, no longer the broken man who'd appeared at my door 6 months ago. Her confident smile died. Your Honor, Jennifer began, the defendant has operated a multi-state financial fraud scheme targeting military personnel and their families. Rebecca's attorney, some slick-looking man in an expensive suit, tried to interrupt. Objection, Your Honor. This is a civil matter between spouses regarding Sit down, Mr. Carlyle. Judge Martinez wasn't having it. Continue, Ms. Walsh. Jennifer opened the first evidence folder. The defendant used multiple false identities to establish banking relationships across 4 states. She systematically drained joint accounts while manipulating life insurance policies to benefit from her victims' potential deaths. I watched Rebecca's face turn pale. She hadn't expected us to connect the dots across state lines. She hadn't expected us to find David Chen or Marcus Rodriguez or Linda Patterson. She'd counted on my son being too broken to fight back. She'd counted wrong. The evidence shows a pattern spanning 4 years and 47 identified victims, Jennifer continued, spreading bank statements across the evidence table. The defendant would marry her targets, gain access to their finances, then disappear with systematic precision. Harold stood to present his financial analysis. The money laundering techniques show professional sophistication. The defendant used shell companies, fake investment accounts, and identity fraud to obscure the paper trail. Rebecca whispered frantically to her attorney. I could see her panic growing as witness after witness testified to the same pattern. David Chen described losing everything to her, investment opportunities. Marcus Rodriguez played recordings of Rebecca planning her exit strategies. Linda Patterson presented marriage certificates proving Rebecca had been married to multiple men simultaneously. Furthermore, Your Honor, Jennifer said, opening the insurance folder, the defendant increased my client's life insurance to $500,000 and changed the beneficiary to her mother just days before her disappearance. The judge leaned forward. She increased the policy and changed the beneficiary without the insured's knowledge? Using electronic signatures obtained through unauthorized access to his military banking credentials. Judge Martinez's expression hardened. This court finds sufficient evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and interstate financial crimes. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I was protecting myself from my husband's gambling debts. Ma'am, the judge cut her off, we have 18 months of bank records showing systematic theft. Your husband has never placed a bet or entered a casino. Your story doesn't match the evidence. She expected him to be broken and silent. Subscribe to see how preparation defeats predators. The judge continued, I'm ordering immediate asset recovery of all funds transferred from joint accounts. Additionally, I'm reversing all debt transfers and credit obligations placed on the plaintiff without his knowledge. My son's shoulders straightened. Months of debt and destroyed credit were about to disappear with a few words from the bench. Furthermore, Judge Martinez said, looking directly at Rebecca, the scope and interstate nature of these crimes require criminal referral. I'm ordering this case forwarded to federal prosecutors for investigation of racketeering charges. Rebecca slumped in her chair. Her attorney gathered his papers with the look of someone already planning his exit strategy. The judge didn't just reverse the debt transfers. He ordered criminal referrals. Preparation beats predators. Drop evidence wins if you believe justice is possible. The asset recovery specialist smiled as she handed us the account statements. Every penny, plus penalties and interest. 3 weeks after the hearing, Sarah Chen from the Federal Asset Recovery Team called us into her downtown office. No relation to David Chen, but she'd handled his case 2 years earlier when nobody else would listen to his fraud claims. Your documentation made this the smoothest recovery I've processed in 15 years, she said, spreading account statements across her desk. $63,412 recovered from frozen accounts. Plus $18,000 in penalties assessed against the defendant. My son stared at the numbers. More money than Rebecca had stolen. More than he'd lost to her schemes. The penalty money comes from where? I asked. Federal asset forfeiture laws allow additional penalties when fraud involves identity theft and interstate crimes. Your son's case qualified for maximum penalties. Sarah pulled out credit reports showing my son's restored credit score. All fraudulent accounts have been removed. Credit cards opened without authorization, closed and reversed. The car loan for the vehicle he never drove, eliminated. His credit rating is actually higher now than before his marriage. Higher? The credit agencies flagged him as a fraud victim, which provides additional protection against future identity theft. Plus, the successful prosecution creates a positive legal record. My son picked up his credit report with hands that no longer shook. I can get an apartment? A car loan? You can get anything you could afford before she destroyed your finances. Plus, you have legal documentation proving the debt wasn't your responsibility if questions ever arise. Sarah opened another folder. The Ohio accounts were more complex. She'd layered money through shell companies and fake investment firms. But federal subpoena power traced everything. She showed us account printouts from banks I'd never heard of in states I'd never visited. Rebecca's money trail stretched from Tennessee to Florida to Colorado. She'd been preparing multiple escape routes, probably planning to disappear completely once she'd destroyed enough families. What happens to the money she spent? I asked. Asset forfeiture laws allow recovery from her current accounts, her mother's accounts where insurance money was directed, even the co-workers' accounts where she deposited stolen funds. If she spent money on cars, jewelry, property, we can seize and sell those assets. Sarah turned to my son. Your case created the legal framework that allowed us to recover money for David Shen and Marcus Rodriguez too. Their cases had been closed as domestic disputes. Your evidence reopened federal investigation. My son looked up with something I hadn't seen in months. Pride. Not just in his financial recovery, but in helping other men get their lives back. The criminal investigation is just beginning, Sarah continued. 3 states are now coordinating prosecution. Your testimony will be crucial, but you're no longer a victim. You're a witness helping stop a predator. She handed him the bank routing information for his new accounts. Clean slate. New bank, new account numbers, new security protocols. She can never access your money again. The criminal investigation was just beginning. 3 states were now involved. Financial recovery is possible. What would you do with justice served? The detective called with updates on 2 other victims who'd come forward. The pattern was expanding into other states. Detective Williams from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had been tracking Rebecca's operations for 8 months. When our case broke open the interstate connections, his phone started ringing with reports from across the Southeast. Your son's case was the key that unlocked everything, he explained during our conference call. We now have confirmed victims in 6 states, with potential victims in 4 more. The scope was staggering. Rebecca hadn't just been running individual cons, she'd been operating a sophisticated criminal network that targeted military personnel, recent divorcees, and men going through life transitions. The co-worker, Marcus Patterson, had been working with her for 3 years. They'd identify targets through social media, dating apps, and workplace connections. She'd handle the romance and financial manipulation while he provided backup identity documents and money laundering services. Harold leaned forward during the call. How many total victims? Confirmed financial losses approaching $800,000 across 23 victims. But the psychological damage extends to their families, their children, their extended support networks. 23 families destroyed by 2 people with laptops and fake smiles. Your documentation methods have become our training model, Detective Williams continued. We're teaching other fraud victims how to preserve evidence the way you did. Digital screenshots, timeline documentation, cross-referenced banking records. My son had been quiet through most of the call, but now he spoke up. Are we stopping them? Or just cleaning up the mess? Both. Rebecca and Marcus are facing federal charges that carry 15 to 25-year sentences. But more importantly, we've identified their methods and can warn potential future targets. Detective Williams sent us copies of the federal indictment. RICO conspiracy charges. Interstate fraud. Identity theft. Money laundering. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. The list covered 3 full pages of legal language that translated to decades in federal prison. The federal case will take 18 months to fully prosecute. But the local charges were filed within a week, he said. Rebecca's being held without bail pending trial. Flight risk. Harold asked about asset recovery for the other victims. Most of them will get significant money back. Your case established the legal precedents and investigative techniques that made recovery possible for everyone else. I felt pride mixed with sadness. Other families had been destroyed while we were fighting our battle. But our fight had created the tools to help them rebuild. There's one more thing, Detective Williams said. We found evidence that Rebecca and Marcus were planning to expand operations into military base communities in Texas and California. Your case stopped them before they could destroy dozens more families. My son straightened in his chair. Our fight saved other people. Your fight saved dozens of other families who don't even know they were targets. The federal case would take 18 months. But the local charges were filed within a week. One family's fight can expose widespread fraud. How do we protect others? My son signed the lease on his own apartment with money that was rightfully his. The smile was different now, careful, but genuine. 6 months after the court victory, I watched him carry boxes up the stairs to his new place. A small apartment near the plant, nothing fancy, but it was his. Earned with his own money, secured with his restored credit, chosen because he wanted it. The deposit check didn't bounce, he said with a grin that held just a trace of his old humor. Still feels weird having money in accounts that are actually mine. The healing hadn't been simple or quick. There were nights he'd call me at 2 a.m., panicked about bills he thought he'd forgotten or debts that might still be lurking. There were mornings he'd check his bank balance 3 times before believing the numbers were real. Trust didn't rebuild overnight. But it was rebuilding. I could see it in small things. He'd started dating again. Cautiously, with boundaries that would have seemed paranoid before Rebecca. He'd taken a promotion at the plant that required him to handle sensitive information, something he wouldn't have been able to do with destroyed credit. I got something for you, he said, pulling an envelope from his kitchen counter. Insurance money. From the policy she'd manipulated. I opened the envelope to find a check for $5,000. I don't want this money, I said immediately. It's not blood money, Mom. The insurance company calculated interest and penalties on the policy manipulation. They're paying damages to everyone affected by her fraud. Take it. You spent months fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The hollow look was gone. The shame that had bent his shoulders for months had been replaced by something stronger. Not just confidence, but wisdom. He'd learned to spot predators because he'd survived one. There's something else, he continued. Jennifer wants me to speak at a seminar for fraud victims. Share what we learned about documentation and legal preparation. This was new. My son had never been comfortable speaking in public, but now he wanted to help other victims find their voices. What would you tell them? That silence is what predators count on. That documentation saves lives. That families fighting together can beat professionals who hunt alone. He pulled out photos from the fraud victim support group he'd started attending. Faces of other people rebuilding their lives after financial betrayal. Men and women who'd found strength in shared experience. Some of them lost more money than I did. But they all say the same thing: fighting back changed them. Made them stronger. Recovery takes time, but it's possible. Subscribe to see how families can heal and grow stronger. I helped him arrange furniture in his new living room, and we talked about the future. Not about Rebecca or court dates or criminal trials, but about ordinary things. His work schedule. Weekend plans. The kind of simple conversation we'd lost during the crisis. A letter arrived from the prosecutor's office. The case was going to trial, and they needed our testimony. Healing while fighting for justice is possible. What does recovery look like to you? The guilty verdict came back unanimous. But the real victory was watching my son walk out of that courthouse with his head high. The federal trial had taken 14 months. Witness testimonies, expert analysis, and mountains of evidence that connected Rebecca's crimes across 6 states and 4 years. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Rebecca sat stone-faced as the verdict was read. 22 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Marcus Patterson had pled guilty months earlier and testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. Even he got 12 years. But the courtroom drama wasn't what mattered most to me. What mattered was my son's testimony. He'd spoken clearly and calmly about the financial destruction, the emotional manipulation, the systematic betrayal. No anger, no broken voice, just facts delivered by someone who'd survived and grown stronger. The prosecutor had called him an exemplary witness whose documentation and courage made this prosecution possible. After the verdict, we walked outside into bright afternoon sunshine. My son stopped on the courthouse steps and looked back at the building where we'd spent so many hours fighting for justice. "It's over," he said simply. "How does it feel?" "Like I can breathe again." David Chen and Marcus Rodriguez joined us on the courthouse steps. 3 men who'd been targeted by the same predator, now friends bonded by survival and justice. They'd started their own support group for fraud victims, meeting monthly to share recovery strategies and warning signs. "She's going to appeal," David said. "Her attorney filed papers yesterday." My son shrugged. "Let her appeal. The evidence doesn't change. The bank records don't change. 23 victims don't disappear because she doesn't like the verdict." This was the difference I'd been watching grow in him. He'd learned that his worth wasn't determined by what had been done to him, but by how he'd chosen to respond. Jennifer joined us with final paperwork. Asset recovery is complete for all victims. Rebecca's appeals won't affect that. The money stays recovered. "What about future victims?" I asked. "Are other people safe from her?" Federal prison, 22 years, means she'll be monitored for the rest of her life after release. Her financial access will be restricted. Her ability to manipulate banking systems will be eliminated. My son pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from a stranger in Colorado. "Thank you for fighting back. Your case helped me spot the warning signs when someone tried the same thing on me." Messages like that arrived weekly now. People who'd heard about our case and recognized similar patterns in their own relationships. People who'd asked better questions because we'd shared our story. People who'd demanded documentation because we'd shown them what predators fear most. "The prosecutor wants to use our case in training seminars," my son said. "Teach other families how to document financial abuse and fight back effectively." I looked at my son, confident, purposeful, using his pain to protect others. This was the man he'd become through surviving the worst betrayal of his life. We walked away from that courthouse together, casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. Behind us, justice had been served. Ahead of us, other families would be safer because we'd refused to be silent. Drop the one lesson from this fight that you'll carry forward. Justice is possible when families refuse to be silent.